This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sarah.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show. Today's Books for Breakfast table is very festive indeed, as we celebrate the best of books and cultural events in 2025. And to help us celebrate, we've gathered at our table 4 writers whose works we both love and whose cultural choices we are really looking forward to hearing them all talk about. They have each been asked to choose just one book, either fiction or non-fiction, that they've especially loved this year. They've also been asked to choose one cultural event. It could be a film, an exhibition, music that they've really enjoyed as well in 2025. And you never know, Peter, you and me might throw in a few choices as well. What do you think?
Yeah, if we get a chance, we might.
If we get a chance, because they're all raring to go here.
The 4 writers that we have with us this morning are Sarah Gilmartin, Neil Hegarty, Caitriona Lally, and Philip Davison. And so you're all very welcome to this festive mince pie laden table this morning. So, okay, let's begin with books. First of all, we're going to talk about books. And we start with Sarah Gilmartin. So Sarah is an arts journalist, playwright or story writer, and novelist. Her best-selling debut novel, Dinner Party, came out in 2021 and was shortlisted for an Irish Book Award and the Kate O'Brien Award. And her second novel, Service, which came out 2 years ago in 2023, was a Waterstones Book of the Month, Washington Post Top Books of the Summer, Book of the Year in the Irish Times, Irish Independent, and indeed the Sunday Independent and Sunday Business Post. So it's great to have you here with us today, Sarah. And you've chosen a book by a very well-known Irish novelist, but in this case, it's not a novel that you've chosen. So can you reveal the writer and the choice, and maybe tell us a bit about why what appealed to you about it?
Sure. Thanks, Peter. And I'm delighted to be here today. I've picked Attention by Anne Enright, which came out, I think, at the end of October. So it's a selection of her non-fiction over the last 10 or 15 years. And it's divided into 3 sections: voices, bodies and time. And it's just brilliant. So spiky and sharp, just really clever and incisive. You know, all the things that we associate with her fiction, really funny as well. I could have read it forever. And it's unusual for me, I suppose, because I would typically read a lot of fiction, but I love Anne Enright's novels. So whenever she writes anything, I tend to want to read it. And this is really, really cohesive and just wonderful kind of collection of her writing over the last, say, 10 to 15 years. And it gives a kind of an overview of her love of reading, her love of writing, her responding to various different writers. And then also it talks about things like the body, the kind of personal realm as well. And I just found it really, really interesting. And there's a kind of a pleasure for anyone who lives in Dublin as well, or who's familiar with Dublin. There's a kind of map of Dublin that we get along the way. So whether Enright is talking about Ulysses or Joyce, or whether she's talking about her own personal experiences, like she was born in the Stella Maris nursing home on Earlsford Terrace, which I had never heard of. And then when she was in her 20s, she lived on St. Kevin's Parade, which is just down the road from us here, where we're recording, just off Clonbrassil Street. So there's a really kind of lovely map of Dublin and how the city has changed over the years, and beneath the kind of versions that are there now, there's kind of the versions that were there before. And Enright quotes Derek Mahon's poem J.P. Dunleavy's Dublin when it says that years fly past anti-clockwise like clock hands in a bar mirror. So that's just a kind of an overview or a summary of what's in the book, but there's really a multitude, so it's very difficult to kind of give a succinct synopsis.
It does sound fascinating, though, and I know that because one of the other writers that she mentioned that you're interested in was Maeve Brennan, isn't that right? You were saying that you kind of had gone back maybe to rereading Maeve Brennan after reading Anne Enright.
Yeah, so that's one of the beauties of the book, that whenever you put it down or when you finish it, you just want to pick up another book. So for Anne has a lot of different essays on, there's ones on McGahern, Monroe, Joyce. But for me, the one I loved the most was Maeve Brennan, because I love her stories. I would have read her only fairly recently, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, when The Stinging Fly published her collection, The Springs of Affection, republished it. But reading Anne's essay, which I believe was the introduction to that collection, made me just want to go back straight into the stories. So I read all the Dublin stories again, the stories of two fairly unhappy families, two fairly unhappy marriages, the Durdens and the Baggots. Although, as Enright notes in her collection, it's kind of, the Baggots are slightly less unhappy than the Durdens. But it was really wonderful to spend time with those characters again and see the way Brennan brings them to life on the page. And she's so specific in her use of detail, and there's a really kind of, I suppose, tense and claustrophobic atmosphere in the stories, but in her style there's a kind of capaciousness that you can see both sides to the marriage, although I favour the female perspective in that I think on the whole, this time I felt that if the women, Mrs. Durden and Mrs. Bagot, had married other husbands, that they might have had very different lives. But I didn't feel the same way about particularly Hubert Durden. I think he probably would have had a similar trajectory. So it's been wonderful just to kind of revisit these characters and the work.
Can I raise my hand here and say as well, and I could see Caitriona nodding as well, and everyone here nodding, because she's an amazing writer, Maeve Brennan. And actually my father remembers Maeve Brennan's father, Robert Brennan, who was supposed to be so statuesque and handsome and went out to the States as the first representative of Ireland over in America, and that's why Maeve ended up staying there. But I always think it's funny that she's there in New York and she's looking back and remembering Ranelagh with such detail. Yeah. But you were talking about mapping the city. There's a brilliant story by Maeve Brennan where I think it's Mr. Dearden is taking the tram back to Ranelagh, and then they have a big row. But it is again about mapping the city, isn't it?
Yeah, they, you really get a sense of it. And even though, the stories, a lot of them are set within the house, those kind of glimpses she gives us of, say, St. Stephen's Green. So with the Durdens before they moved to Ranelagh, which ultimately for them became an unhappy move. I think Rose Durden was very happy in Somerville Street the flat was on, which I've looked up. It was supposed to be off St. Stephen's Green and I couldn't find it, but I don't know if that's because it's fictional or just because my Google Map skills are absolutely terrible. But yeah, there is a real sense of kind of a city coming to life, and also at a particular point in time. And I suppose wider than that as well, there's a sense of kind of the societal backdrop of the kind of Catholic Church, the strong arm of the Catholic Church, and how limiting it was for women in that kind of patriarchal society. There's a brilliant story where Mrs. Durden, they have a huge fight at home over something like she spills a tray. The breakfast tray is a really important detail that gets repeated quite a lot in the stories, both in the Baggots and the Durdens. And she spills a tray of food that she's bringing into her husband, and they have a huge argument. And she has nowhere to go, so she leaves the house and she thinks, well, where can I go? I can go to the church, but the priest wouldn't believe me. He'd just send me back to my husband. And there's a real sense of no agency and kind of characters stuck within their own lives because of the wider kind of societal backdrop that they find themselves in. Yeah,
it's brilliant that Anne Enright has brought you back to the stories.
And speaking of Anne, just coming back to Anne Enright, just before we leave that, I was wondering, was there a passage from the Anne Enright book that you might read to us?
Absolutely. So I'm going to read from her essay on Maeve Brennan, just a couple of paragraphs. Maeve Brennan didn't have to be a woman for her work to be forgotten, though it surely helped. She did not have to become a bag lady for her work to be revived, though that possibly helped too. The story of her mental decline is terrifying for anyone who works with words, who searches her clean, sour sentences for some hint or indication of future madness, and then turns to check their own. Brennan is, for a new generation of Irish women writers, a casualty of old wars not yet won. The prose holds her revived reputation very well, especially the Irish stories. These feel transparently modern, the way that Dubliners by Joyce feels modern. It is partly a question of restraint. Benedict Kiley, Walter Mackin, perhaps even Mary Lavin, ran the risk of being Irish on the pages of The New Yorker, which is to say, endearing. Frank O'Connor was the cutest of the lot, perhaps, as well as the most successful. Brennan remains precise, unyielding. Something lovely and unbearable is happening on the page.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. Something lovely and unbearable. That's beautiful. So thanks to Sarah Gilmartin. She was talking about Anne Enright's Attention, writing on life, art and the world, and it's published by Vintage Publishing. I think it came out in October, didn't it? 2025. So, and as usual, details on all the books that we're talking about today will be available on our website, www.booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And so now, Neil, we move to you, Neil Hegarty. Neil Hegarty grew up in Derry, Northern Ireland. He lives in Dublin. Neil's writing includes novels, biography, history, essays, literary criticism, short fiction. Oh my God, Neil, you're very prolific. The first novel I read by Neil was Inch Levels, and it came out in 2017. I thought it was such a moving tale of the legacy that violence leaves and the complexities of a family life. And it was shortlisted for the 2017 Kerry Group Novel of the Year Award. And his second novel, The Jewel, was published in 2019. And the Irish Times said that's a vital book for our times. And he has also written a biography on David Frost. That was The Life That Was, which came out in 2015. So Neil, your choice for your favourite book of 2025 is by a Dutch writer I've long admired who has an Irish connection. Can you tell us who the writer is? Why did you love the book so much? And what the book is, of course.
Well, thanks, Enda and Peter. Yeah, the Dutch writer is Gerbrand Bakker, and his novel is The Hairdresser's Son. Irish readers may know him slightly better as the author of The Twin, which won the Impact Prize, now the Dublin Literary Award, a few years ago. I had the good fortune of interviewing Gerbrand at ILF Dublin in Merrion Square in May, and I had so enjoyed the novel when I read it, but speaking to him, listening to him, it brought it to life in a whole new way. I was interested in, he'd spliced together fiction and essentially documentary in this novel. It felt like a new form. And I asked him to explain why he had done that. The documentary was the 1977 Tenerife air disaster, in which almost 600 people died. It's the worst aviation disaster ever. And it happened when a KLM, so a Dutch plane, crashed into a Pan Am plane on the runway at Tenerife. And he explained that because the KLM plane was the one at fault, there was a kind of a pall of silence fell on Dutch society in the aftermath of this appalling disaster. Even though about 400 Dutch people were killed, nobody wanted to talk about it. So his novel grew from this idea that there was a Dutch person on the plane. He was assumed killed. His family were left to get on with their lives in a context of silence, of shame. And I was interested, as I think every Irish person is, in the idea of shame, the operations of shame, and how we manage to go on living in this context, in this kind of atmosphere of shame. So it's a very moving book, but also it's such an interesting book in that it brings two disparate forms together into, I think, a very successful whole.
And also, isn't the man who died, it was his father, the central character's dad? Is that the story behind it? And he then becomes a hairdresser. He's the hairdresser's son, basically.
He's the hairdresser's son. His father flies off to Tenerife one day without telling anybody. He's assumed dead, assumed killed. His son is born 6 months later. So he never knew his father, and he's left to kind of reconstruct his life and to see what happens in this kind of void where nobody wants to talk about what happened to his father and to so many other people as well.
Sounds really interesting. I'm dying to read it. I've read all his books except for this one. And I was telling you earlier that we were down in Listowel and I was reading The Detour. I don't know if any of you have ever read that. It's a really good Gerbrand Bakker book. I think we were all reading because he won the Impact all those years ago, because The Twin was such a great book, wasn't it? Anyway, I was sitting in a restaurant and I looked up and there he was. And I was looking at the back of the book and I was going, I think that is him. So then I went over and I said, do you mind me asking, are you Gerbrand Bakker? because Peter here has lived in Holland and he helps me with my Dutch pronunciation. So I did it in my best Dutch accent and he went, yes, I am. Anyway, so it was so weird to see the person you're reading. That only happened to me once before as well. I was reading a David Lodge book and I was on a train and I looked up and he was sitting there. Anyway, I went over to Gerbrand and we had a chat, and I just think he is a fantastic writer. So I'd say the writing is beautiful in that book as well, is it, Neil?
The writing is fantastic, and it's translated by the Australian translator David Culmer, who he's worked with on all of his work. So they have an excellent relationship, and it's important, of course, in translated work to reference the translator too.
Very important. And also, if you do win the Dublin International Literary Prize, the translator is going to get awarded as well, which is very good, I think. But I'd love to hear a piece from the hairdressers, and I think everyone else would as well, because you described it so well.
This is a very short section from it, but it kind of encapsulates where the protagonist is, the hairdresser's son. His name is Simon. And he's living in what was his father's hairdressing salon. There are 2 floors above the shop. That's where Simon lives, all paid off and all his. The first thing he did was knock down the non-load-bearing wall between the kitchen and the living room. He did it himself with a sledgehammer. After that, he gradually made the grand parental home his own. There's no need for him to keep the sign turned to ouvert the whole day long. He suspects he wouldn't be there if his father was still alive. If he hadn't boarded the wrong plane on the 27th of March 1977, the wrong plane that crashed on the wrong island. Like Henny, he'd gone on holidays without any advance warning, alone. At least that's what Simon's mother thinks. Simon hadn't been born yet. It's possible his father didn't even know he was on the way. Simon was born on the 4th of September 1977, and he was predestined to cut hair, especially with that dead father. Fine by him.
Thanks for that, Neil Hegarty. That's Gerbrand Blacker's The Hairdresser's Son, published by Scribe in UK, and it's translated, as you said, by David Culmer. And details will be available on our website. We have a lot of books today which are non-fiction, so I like that idea of fiction blending with non-fiction.
And now to Caitriona Lally. Caitriona was the recipient of the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature back in 2018, and she also won a Laden Fellowship for fiction in 2019. She was the inaugural Rooney Writer Fellow at Trinity Longroom Hub. Her first novel, Eggshells, was published in the US by Melville House in 2017 and in the UK by Borough Press the year after. Caitriona lives in Dublin, and she divides her time between her young children, writing and working. Wonderland is her second novel, that came out in 2021, and there's a new book forthcoming with New Island, which will come out in March of next year. We might go back, we might talk about that in a while. But I'm just curious, Caitriona, what did you bring to the breakfast table?
Well, thanks for having us here. I brought The Black Pool, A Memoir of Forgetting by Tim McGowan. And it was the subtitle, I think, The Memoir of Forgetting, that appealed to me. I haven't read anything by Tim before, and I just love the cover. But I couldn't believe that it's hard to explain it. So it's a memoir of addiction, I suppose, alcohol and drugs. And it sounds bleak, but it is bleak, but it's not. It's funny. Like he manages to talk about this in a really funny way, in a raw, the most honest book about this kind of subject I've read, where he's not saving himself. Because I think if you're writing memoir, the tendency is to be kind to yourself and try and put yourself forward in a good light, but he doesn't. It's very physical. It's all about the body emissions and what happens when you're in the throes of addiction. But it's funny and it's light in places. He's kind as well. I think there's a real kindness towards, say, his family. I think sometimes in memoir there can be a tendency to blame family or parents for everything. He's not. There's no self-indulgence. It's very open and kind of asking questions, and there's a great depiction of kindness of other people towards him too, when he's completely down and out and he's, in a heap somewhere and somebody offers him water or food, or a really beautiful description of when he's a student in Trinity College and he manages to get the key to the roof of a building where I work, actually, where I clean. And I know that roof. It's a beautiful place of the museum building, and he gets up there and he's stoned and he's drunk and he's a danger to himself, and the security guard comes up and is so kind and just kind of talks him back down, brings him into the security booth, gives him a cigarette. And so there's those gorgeous little moments that I think you need the lightness in this book, and he does it beautifully. He managed to get the darkness, the lightness, and the kind of, you have faith in humanity after reading it. So it really spoke to me. And it's something I'm fortunate not to know much about addiction, but it's really insightful, and it's hard to explain. It's like, it's self-deprecating, but in an honest way, not a kind of, I'm struggling here to get it across. Yeah, I love the book.
Because memoir is very much a thing of, I mean, there's good memoirs and there's not. What makes a good memoir?
Yeah, for me it is honesty. It's really asking yourself questions. It's not just blaming something outside of yourself, maybe, or asking why did this happen, or why did I do this, and taking responsibility. Like he's very good at that. He knows this is an innate thing, and he's the author of his own misfortune, but there's no kind of overt self-recrimination either. It's a really fine balance, and it fascinates me because, like, I've tried to write a memoir. I don't think I've hit that balance. Like, sometimes you tend towards, oh, boo-hoo, woe is me. And he has serious problems, but he manages to deal with it in a funny way. And it's a skill. I don't know how he pulls it off.
Maybe we should hear a bit. Maybe we should hear it.
So I'm not going to read one of the funny bits because I couldn't do justice, but it's a slightly dark bit. I woke up on floors crunchy with broken glass in postcodes that I'd had no idea existed. I woke up on the floor of a cantina moments after passing out, slipping from my chair, moated by my own puke, the noise of the other drinkers' applause echoing around the room. I woke up in courtyards surrounded by plastic tables whose surfaces were covered in sticky rings and toppled those red cups that you see in American high school films. On a holiday to Chiapas, I woke up in a cemetery, lying on a grave, deep in unkempt grass, a plastic bottle of pox in my fist, while people walking to Mass at the little yellow church shook their heads at me. Later, after I'd stopped teaching English while I was out on assignment for a newspaper, writing about refugees fleeing violence in Central America, I woke up at the foot of a golf cart on an island in Belize, a six-pack of Guinness and a slice of pizza with some weed crumbled onto it, sitting on the driver's seat. One of these nights by the Eagles was playing on my phone. I woke up in parks under trees. I woke up in the gardens of some kind of cultural centre, the two suited security guards ushering me across the lawn with the beaming obsequiousness of butlers. I woke up with sand in my pockets on a beach in Acapulco after someone decided it would be cool for us to drive there because we were too high to sleep. I woke up in someone else's beat-up car wearing my swimming trunks and her V-neck sweater, the owner asleep in the back, she and I both soaked, a bare tree looming over the car, its branches fucked by disease, growing in a wild spherical tangle that I felt convinced for a moment was a nervous system beaming some kind of terrible information at me. And that's another piece of it. There's the hallucinations are huge in it. These, it's a dreadful image. These, what in reality is something very simple and positive, and they morph into something awful in his head. So it's a real insight into the worst parts of drugs, I suppose.
How did you come across him, Caitriona, or how did you?
It was literally Hodges Figgis, just wandering around, and the cover, and the forgetting. I love the memoir Forgetting, that he has these immense black holes, and he's very open about trying to write a memoir when so much has been forgotten. He went through receipts and emails on his computer to find what he did in certain years, because there's such gaps in his memory.
God, that's a pretty brilliant thing to do, isn't it? But that sounded like a spoken word poem nearly. Yeah, exactly. I woke up. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
I love the flow of it. So thanks, Caitriona, for reading from Tim McGowan's The Black Pool, published by Sceptre 2025. And now we're going to move on. Is that okay, Peter? We'll move on. That's good. We move on to Philip Davison. Philip Davison, you're very welcome to the table. He was born in Dublin. He's published 9 novels, including, I remember when I was about 18, finding The Book Thief's Heartbeat. I'm sure you're fed up of people praising that book, Phil, but it was absolutely...
It's a long time ago.
A long time ago, but we were talking earlier about Mapping the City. It's an amazing book. I don't know if anyone here has read it, but it's actually by my bed upstairs. I like that book a lot. He also was published by Jonathan Cape. The Crooked Man, The Long Suit, Eureka Dunes and Quiet City have been published recently. And Philip, you've written a drama based on... did you write the drama based on your novel The Crooked Man? Did you co-write that for?
Yes, no, that was adapted for television. I didn't write the script.
It was adapted, and then also loads of short stories. A Play in the Peacock, 12 radio plays. Co-wrote the script for Learning Gravity, a beautiful documentary film on the poet, essayist, and undertaker Thomas Lynch. And it was directed by Carl Blacka. It's really beautiful. If anyone hasn't seen that, I really think go and look for it. And you had something recently, Philip, didn't you, in the IFI?
Yes, a film called Criminal Conversation, which wrote in 1980. It's a long time ago, and it was directed by Kieran Hickey. And at the time we were intent on making films that were modelled more on the French New Wave, or the socialist filmmakers coming out of British television. And we looked around; there was so little that was about Ireland now, and so that was our attempt, along with a couple of other works.
Really brilliant. It's great that the IFI has those archives, isn't it? And you've written thriller fiction dealing with a character called Harry Fielding in MI5, and you've an interesting spy book that you want to talk about today, don't you?
Yes, it's called The Spy and the Traitor. It's the true story of Oleg Gordievsky, and it's written by Ben McIntyre. Now, you don't have to be particularly interested in spies and the world of spies to read this book. I think it's a riveting account of a double life, and it's a deep character study. It's very much more than good journalism. It puts me in mind of that Oscar Wilde quote, give a man a mask and he will reveal his true self. Now, after the Prague Spring, Gordievsky, who was a really talented and committed KGB high-ranking officer, he had a change of heart. And for 11 years, he spied for the West. His wife was KGB. He was held in very high regard. And we live in a world now where we struggle to distinguish between misinformation and fact. And for those inhabiting this kind of world, it's always been like that. And many of us can freeze in the face of confusion. These people don't. So it's a really interesting exploration of somebody who also had to have a lot of faith in strangers and people to protect him. And ultimately he was betrayed by somebody in the CIA, and he was called back to Moscow, and he had a choice. Would I go back? He was called back under suspicion, and he did go back. Extraordinary nerve. And he was also a very important person because he had two things in particular. One, he was able to tell the West that the new man coming was a man called Gorbachev. So the West knew long before Gorbachev rose to power that this was coming, and that was very valuable. And the other thing that he did was, in 1983, there was a major sort of NATO exercise, and the Soviets mistook it as a preamble to an actual attack. And he was able to send a signal to say, listen, they think it's real. You must do something. And they did. Now, people didn't know it at the time, but that had, a profound effect. The description of him being exfiltrated, as they say, from Moscow, when eventually he had to go, is just riveting. It's great. And he escaped through Leningrad and Finland. And afterwards, the KGB in Leningrad were hauled over the coals, and many their careers were ruined. And among the younger members was Vladimir Putin, who survived the purge and went from there.
Apparently he was a terrible spy.
Gordievsky.
Putin.
Oh, Putin. Oh, yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, he was very good at the politics, I think. And, he knew who was who. And that was how he survived in the KGB. And he knew when to be stupid. When to play that, I think. Gordievsky is I think, a far more interesting spy. You know, there's also bizarre things that happen sometimes. For example, he tried to recruit a Scottish Labour Party member, and he tried repeatedly to do that. And he was a very good linguist, but he said he could never understand a word the man said. So it failed. But he also he revealed that Michael Foot had some KGB connections, and this was disputed later. Margaret Thatcher was very appreciative of him when he did finally get back to England, and I got to England, and it was, for a long time he lived in hiding. He died just recently, actually.
So interesting, Philip. Would you like to read a piece from it, just to give us a taste of it? Sure. And also, Le Carre said it's the greatest spy story ever told.
Yeah, that says a lot. Le Carre said it was the best true spy story he ever read, and I understand why. So I'll just read a piece. This is an introduction to a man who would be his first contact after his change of heart, shall we say, and this is in Denmark. Richard Broomhead was our man in Copenhagen and didn't much mind who knew it. The MI6 head of station in Denmark was an old-fashioned public school-educated Englishman, a cheerful, backslapping cove who referred to people he liked as complete darlings and those he didn't as prize shits. Broomhead was descended from poets and adventurers. The family was pedigreed and penniless. He attended Marlborough College and then performed national service in Germany, where he found himself in charge of 250 German prisoners in a former camp for British POWs. The commandant was an Olympic swimmer. Charming chap. We had a ball. He went to Cambridge University, studied Russian, and claimed to have forgotten every word the moment he left. He was turned down by the Foreign Office, then failed to get a job in a bakery, decided to become an artist, and was living on onions in a rundown London flat, drawing pictures of the Albert Memorial when a friend suggested he apply for a job in the Colonial Office. They wanted me to go to Nicosia. I said, lovely, where's that? In Cyprus, he wound up as private secretary to the governor. It was great fun. There was an MI6 officer living in the garden. Lovely chap. Recruited me. Introduced to the firm, he was posted first to the UN in Geneva under a deep cover and then to Athens. Finally, in 1970, at the age of 42, he was appointed senior MI6 officer in Copenhagen. I was supposed to go to Iraq. Not sure what happened. Tall, handsome, and immaculately tailored, always ready for a joke and another drink, Broomhead swiftly became a familiar figure on the Copenhagen diplomatic party circuit. He referred to his clandestine work as mucking about. Richard Broomhead was one of those Englishmen who put a great deal of effort into appearing to be a lot more stupid than they really are. He was a formidable intelligence officer. From the day he arrived in Copenhagen, Broomhead set about making the lives of his Soviet adversaries a misery.
Oh my gosh, I want to read that book. It sounds so interesting. Thank you so much, Philip, and to everyone for bringing all the books to the table. They're all so interesting. Now, Peter, you want to talk about a writer that we actually had on the podcast a while ago.
Back in June, I think we had Sarah Moss on the podcast, and we talked to her about her novel that just came out this year, Ripeness, and which I really liked. And I read it kind of, as we were doing that, I read a few of her other books as well. And then I went on to read more of her books. But one of the ones that really struck me was this short novel that came out I think it came out in 2018. And it's called Ghost Wall. This is a short novel, and it's kind of like the opening section sort of reminded me of Seamus Heaney's poem Punishment, in that it's a close description of like an Iron Age sacrifice of a young woman. And the story that follows mixes kind of ancient history and contemporary reality. So it follows teenager Sylvie, and her father, he's totally obsessed with early British history, a kind of very purist version of it. And he's discussed it, for instance. He finds out that ancient Britons were in fact Celts. and spoke Celtic languages, and he's absolutely appalled at this, as if his kind of myth has been invaded by a bunch of mix, and so he and his daughter, the whole setup is they're participating in a kind of reenactment of the Iron Age with a professor of archaeology from a university and a bunch of kind of posh sort of students, and they're all dressed up in Iron Age clothes, and they have to kind of fend for themselves, and they can only eat whatever they pick from kind of trees or hunt or kill. It's kind of like Iron Age Flintstones kind of, but reenacting kind of ancient rituals, and there's lots of kind of, because it's of course English novel, so there's lots of class tension in it as well, because the posh middle class students, the working class hero the teenager, and her father, who's brutal character and violent, and her mother, the mother is kind of sitting there over a cauldron, put upon and expected to cook all the food, so it's all this kind of quite brutal misogyny that goes on as well.
And it's full of ghosts, isn't it, Peter?
Well, it's full of ghosts, but it's like domestic violence and but it's kind of like, it reminds me, because it's like some of the varieties of nationalism that we're seeing all too much of right now. But it is written brilliantly, and it is. Like, it is on one level, it's a kind of forensic examination of kind of like, like misogyny, trauma, nationalism. But it's full of ghosts, but ghosts not only of the past, but very much also of the present. So,
Caitriona, have you read that book? It's absolutely brilliant. But Peter, I was thinking, just listening to you there, this year it's 50 years since Seamus Heaney's North was published. And when you think of a poem like Punishment, the opening section of Sarah's book is so similar to it, isn't it? It just gets very close to that awful situation of a young woman.
This is the opening paragraph of the book. They bring her out, not blindfolded, but eyes widened to the last sky, the last light. The last cold bites her fingers and her face. The stones, not the last stones, bruise her bare feet. She stumbles. They hold her up. No need to be rough. Everyone knows what is coming. From deep inside her body, from the cord in her spine and the wide bloodways under the ribs, from the emptiness of her womb and the rising of her chest, she shakes, a body in fear. They lead the fearful body over the turf and along the track, her bare feet numb to most of the pain of rock and sharp rushes. Chanting rises. The drums sound slow, unsyncopated with the last panic of her heart. Others follow, wrapped against the cold, dark figures, processing into the dusk.
I know, it's an amazing opening section.
So I do recommend that, and I found it to be one of my favourite of her books. So Enda, what's your favourite book?
Well, the book that I have here it's a very, very big book, actually. It's Helen Garner, How to End a Story, Collected Diaries. It's actually interesting coming on from Attention and Anne Enright, and I think there's connections, because listening to Caitriona as well talking about Tim McGowan, these diaries, they span a large period, actually. She was born in 1942. Since 1977, she's been writing novels and fiction and short story, and I first encountered her actually by reading her work in Australia when I went out there as a young person. And I remember reading her and reading Frank Moorhouse and Elizabeth Joly and all the writers out in Australia. And she mentions them, Frank Moorhouse definitely in these diaries as well. She's won loads of awards. And the book that I encountered out there by her was a novel called Monkey Grip. And then there was The Children's Back and The House of Grief. And even though she's writing away, she says that the writing of diaries was always her favourite thing. And they've got a real urgency to them. And, when you were talking about Tim McGowan earlier, she is also very self-deprecating about herself. And you can just see there, I'm holding the book up to everyone, you can see that it's just written in short little pieces. So as you're reading it, you're going, why am I reading this? Because it's just everyday life. But then there are little nuggets like, she says, I won't put on my Australian accent for this bit, but she says, I heard third-hand from New York that a very famous old woman writer had read my novel Honour and wanted me to come to Columbia for a term to teach on her course. My informant had left at home the piece of paper which had the writer's name on it. It turned out to be Grace Paley. surely this couldn't possibly be true. I called my sister and told her about it. Wow, she said, but I hate her stuff. So, it's all this kind of stuff. Yeah, Sarah.
Actually, Anne has an essay on the diaries in Attention as well. So, yeah, I think she must have just written it fairly recently. I'm just going to check the date on it. Yeah, it's May 2025. It's called I Stab, and it's a really good essay.
Oh, that's excellent, because now it's all connecting at the breakfast table. So,
and actually, sorry to connect it again, but Sarah Moss also recommended the diaries in the Irish Times just last weekend. So it really is.
Yeah, well, you see, she's such a good writer as well, Helen Garner. So it's interesting as a way to find out about her as a writer as well, I think, but also just about her normal life, because it starts off in the 70s and she's in Melbourne and she's a young fledgling writer with a young daughter, and then it moves into the 80s and she's falling in love and having a passionate affair. And then in the 1990s, it all starts crumbling. But I think they're full of wit and honesty. And actually, because the excerpts are short, like for instance, she'll just do 1 year at a time. There's no date on them. You just find yourself rolling along. So, I think it's really excellent. And I love the fact that she loved keeping diaries and that she kept them, because I've box loads of them as well. I'm hiding them from Peter. But I love writing diaries as well. I think it's brought me back to the value of them as well, I think. But we can talk later about that as well, because I know, for instance, Caitriona has been writing something where you would have probably had to use a lot of diaries. And when you're talking about Tim McGowan there as well, going back and looking at receipts and what he did, how do you record memory as well? It's kind of interesting, I think. But will we move on now, Peter?
Because we kind of want to exhaust our guests really as much as possible. We're kind of we were thinking, okay, so apart from books that you might have read, were there other kind of cultural events that inspired you, or, during the course of 2025? So maybe we're going to start maybe with Philip, and then we work our way back. So just, I know that Graham Nuttall was a great friend of yours, Philip, and that you loved his retrospective exhibition.
Yes, so retrospective in the RDS in September. Yeah, Graham and I, we grew up in the same neighbourhood. And when he'd show up, he'd always be on wheels and he'd always be going somewhere. And there was always, some boundary to be tested or somebody to be observed or whatever. And when I look at the paintings now, I see a kind of mechanical pause. And in my mind, that's something to do with stopping on the bike to take something in and looking deeply at it. And, Graham, he painted fish with eyebrows, and that seemed to fit in a world where the characters have splayed fingers that might engage like cogs. They have noses that can double as beaks instantly. So I think it's that thing that there's a lot from childhood that seems to come through. I mean, I remember there was a petrol station around the corner that had a kind of a walk-in aviary that was full of angry budgerigars, and and all that colour and noise and the smell of petrol. I mean, that was very exotic to us, all of those things somehow do stay with you and feed into your life and work. And when you look at Graham's paintings, there's a kind of a theatrical feel to them. There's these theatrical planes, sliders with hinges, but they sort of suggest that these things can be reassembled and new connections made, and you get a lot of you've got disgruntled chefs, and you get second-rate gangsters and melancholic worldly women and sailors who smell of rum, and all those things, and they all seem to be sort of frozen. But actually, there's something working itself out. And I remember him saying to me once that the sad things come together, and that could have struck me. And I thought, but they come together, and but that's because all is not lost. There's some sense of possibility. So for all the kind of the darkness, and some of these characters, they look dangerous or menacing, but there's also a sense of them being on a stage, and they don't want to be there, but now that they're there, they're going to present themselves. And they're all long-term misfits, you know.
Like us all.
Like us all. Yeah, and it was a collection of work that was gathered. I mean, a lot of his work was sold in private collections or whatever, and this was an odd collection of work. There was stuff from very early on, and there was also some very fine work on a tapestry work, and there was sculptures and small works and big works. So it was great to see stuff. And although I'd be very familiar with this work, I saw things I just hadn't seen before. Yeah, you know, I remember him telling me about his encounter with his one and only encounter, in fact, I think, with his parental grandmother who was a very frightening woman who, you know, she's all sort of Victorian, dressed in black with a sort of a doily kind of, neck collar and all that, and white makeup, and very angular. And she had this alarming cackle, and she was going to push him into the wardrobe, you know, and he never ever forgot that. He was terrified, and it's there in all his work.
So we're going to move on, because Caitriona, you also have an exhibition you want to talk about, because I know you like the writer Sarah Baum, but this was very interesting where you went the other day to the Molesworth Gallery. So do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah. As you said, I'm a huge fan of Sarah Baum's writing, and I loved her memoir Handiwork with Tramp Press a few years ago, where she writes about the artistic process. So I admire anyone who can write and sculpt or make, like they have both skills. So she had an exhibition, Sarah Baum with Molly Douthat, in the Molesworth Gallery, and they're friends, and it was called Holding Space, and the theme was basically their friendship, where Sarah helped Molly. Like, Molly had these long-term kind of dental issues and was in and out of dentist and had a lot of pain, kind of chronic pain over years, I think, and constant procedures, and nothing would fix it. And Sarah was there for her. So Molly is American and living here in Cork, and Sarah was there to help, to care for her, to cook for her. She stayed with Sarah when things were bad. And I just love the theme of that, the concept of care between friends. Like we read about family care or elder care or parents. The idea that caring for a friend who might not have anyone else around, that it's worthy of an exhibition. So Molly had paintings, and some of them were they looked unfinished, like they were pencil sketches with some paint of dentist waiting rooms, or the kind of this curtain with the machinery behind it, this terror kind of feeling of real just menace, what's behind the curtain. And then she'd some beautiful finished, I think it was oil paintings, of Sarah Baum's kitchen, or Sarah's mother's kitchen, where she got help as well when she was in a bad way, and her own mother's or neighbours' houses, or back in America, like people who were kind to her. So there's just constant theme of kindness and caring, which I think appeals to me now. I'm getting soppy and middle-aged, that it's all about decency. But what the highlight for me was Sarah does this really intricate kind of needlework, and there was these handkerchiefs, just hand sewn, beautiful colours, with this space in the middle, this kind of square of space, and it's holding space, this kind of holding a space for your friend in your life. And I just thought it was lovely. And these gorgeous, I have a picture of it here from the exhibition, talismans they're called, and it was 150 kind of fist-sized structures or sculptures of buildings or houses or some kind of structure, we're not sure what. And I love miniatures anyway, so that really appealed to me. They're all white, made of plaster, I think. And each one seemed to be different. Now, I must ask Sarah about this. They all are like really similar, but different in a tiny way. But it's like they're made from those, do you know those coloured blocks toddlers have, that they balance on top of each other? So it just looks, there's something kind of childlike about it, really imaginative. Like you just want to imagine yourself into these structures. So I actually emailed Sarah, because there's 150 of these, and in the catalogue of the exhibition it said it was €12,500 for these 150. So I divided them. I divided 12,500 by 150 and got 83.333. So I emailed to ask, could I buy one? I can't afford all of them, but could I buy one for €83.33? So no, they're sold as a unit. So no, it's not going to happen.
Oh, that's a pity, Caitriona. And isn't Sarah bringing out a book called Opening Night?
Yeah, about this friendship with Molly and the art, and like that theme in common. It's such a lovely idea for a book. It's coming out with Granta next summer, I think.
I love tiny things, and you especially like them from your last novel. Will we move on now, Peter?
So Neil, again, you wanted to talk about an exhibition that you saw and love.
Yeah, I was in Paris for part of September and October. I was lucky enough to have a residency at the Irish College, Irish Cultural Centre in Paris. And one day I took a stroll down the hill in Paris to the Arab Institute. There was an exhibition entitled Treasures of Gaza, 5,000 Years of Culture. And it was quite a small exhibition, 2 rooms, 2 not very large rooms. Not a lot of artefacts in these rooms, but it was immensely powerful. The context was that this selection of artefacts had been removed from Gaza about 15 years ago, had been taken to Geneva for safekeeping. The idea being that the authorities in Gaza couldn't guarantee that there wouldn't be some calamity in the next sort of period of time, and so it came to pass. So as I was walking through these kind of Roman statues, Greek statues all the way up to the Ottomans, I was aware that they had survived the wreck. These objects had survived the wreck, and these were very, very likely the only objects from 5,000 years of Gaza's history to have survived the wreck. I think we're all very accustomed to the idea of objects having their own power, their own authority. That's why we go to museums. But to see these objects and to realise that, yes, they've come spinning down through time and space for us to look at in Paris on that day, but also that they're all that's left from this calamity, that we can be pretty sure that everything else that had been in small museums, public and private in Gaza, are now completely gone. So it's closing in Paris, I think, this week. I must say I would love to see it come to Dublin at some point, because I think as many people as possible should have a chance to see these survivors from a calamity.
Amazing. I mean, it's a powerful reminder that the erasure of the present is also the erasure of the past, of an entire culture.
Exactly.
Peter, thanks for that, Neil. It would be great if that came to Dublin, wouldn't it? And so, Peter, you went to the cinema.
Yeah, just kind of lowbrow stuff, really. And I went to the IFI with my daughter. I don't know if I'm allowed to say her name, Freya, because the campaign on TV at the moment where the auntie posting your family's pictures and you see the child walking and it's hello, and then everywhere she goes people are saying hello to her because her parents have posted anyway, so I better not. Well, anyway.
But you've said it now.
So I've said it now, so everybody will be picking up saying, oh, hello Freya, yeah.
She's also my daughter.
She's also, I know, indeed, our daughter, but it was just the two of us at the cinema. But we went to see the Milos Forman film Amadeus on the big screen, and it came out obviously lots back in the midst of Celtic time, and I can remember being amazed at it then, all those years ago. But for anyone who doesn't know, it's taken from the Peter Shaffer play, and the key setup is kind of the much exaggerated, I suppose, rivalry between Mozart and Salieri in Vienna, and Mozart is played by Tom Hulce as a kind of totally kind of hyperactive, obnoxious, scatological boy child, and he's effortlessly putting a kind of brilliant and obscene and something about easily outdoing the poor, plodding Salieri, who's played by the brilliant, totally brilliant F. Murray Abraham. He got an Oscar for it. They both could have got Oscars, but he got the Oscar. And weirdly, I think neither of them kind of went on to amazing things after that. It was like the summit of their careers. But it's just as the frame is that Salieri is telling the story to a reporter type figure or an interviewer. He's in a kind of poor sort of asylum at the end of his life, and so the interviewer comes in at the beginning and he says and Salieri plays. He's got a piano in his room. He plays a couple of tunes. He says, "Do you recognise that tune?" And the interviewer said, "No." And he plays, "No. Do you recognise that one?" "No." Then he plays a little piece of Mozart, and the guy goes, oh my God, did you write that? And Salieri goes, no, that was Mozart, So that's kind of setting the kind of the tone. But he's kind of, because he's brilliant as well in his own way, like he's awed and he's tormented at the same time, because he actually does really appreciate Mozart's music. It's funny because like the real Salieri was in fact very celebrated and successful in this time, and you can still go to an annual Salieri festival in Llanago near Verona, where he's from, if you're so inclined. But it's just like it was filmed in Prague, pretending to be Vienna. Really atmospheric, full of music and reenactments of the Mozart operas and so on. But also you see him writing, you see him composing, like he's composing on his deathbed, his Requiem, and Salieri is taking the notes down and all this kind of stuff. It's full of that kind of amazing stuff. And he dies in abject kind of poverty. And there's that grim final scene where his body is dumped. I hope I'm not spoiling this film for anybody now, where his body is dumped unceremoniously into a common grave. But I just thought it's just an amazing spectacle, and to see it again on the big screen was definitely one of the highlights. I think Freya was pretty impressed.
Yeah, it's rare to see somebody of her age coming home so excited by it. Yeah.
And turning to yourself, Enda?
Well, actually, again, there's a few connections happening because Sarah earlier mentioned Derek Mahon as well, and I really enjoyed going to the Royal Irish Academy of Music in November because Gallery Press actually put on an evening event about Derek Mahon. Because if you think about it, we've had Evan Boland, the library named after Evan Boland. Seamus Heaney's collected poems have just come out to huge celebrations in Dublin, London and New York. So why not celebrate Derek Mahon, who I remember as a young poet, oh my God, he just made me want to keep writing. And it was a really wonderful evening actually, because Derek Mahon's daughter, Katie Mahon, was there, poets Eleni Quillinan and Paul Muldoon, Stephen Ray and John Banville, actually, they all read poems. And it wasn't one of these events where they spoke, endlessly about Derek Mahon. They just read the work, and the work spoke for itself. And then Peter Fallon introduced and just guided them along. But I thought that was a really striking way to do it as well, just to hear the poetry come through. And to hear a disused shed in County Wexford again, and a beautiful poem like Leaves, somewhere in the heaven of lost futures, the lives we might have lived have found their own fulfillment. So beautiful to hear the poems again. And I know it was only a once-off event, but I was so glad it went along, and it made me think over Christmas now I'm going to be delving back into Mahon again. And it was wonderful to see his daughter reading as well, because she actually looked a little bit like him, didn't she, Peter?
She did, and she's also writing poems herself.
She sent me some of her poems afterwards, so it was nice to read them. But Sarah, you saw, we've done exhibitions, movie, poetry. You saw a play, didn't you?
Yes, I saw Three Sisters as part of Dublin Book Festival at the Hegarty. And I guess just by way of background to this, I go to the theatre a lot, but I must have just gone through a run of maybe 3 or 4 plays that I hadn't loved or hadn't enjoyed. And the day that I was going to see Three Sisters, I had a full day of rider clinics out in DCU, where I've had a residency this year and I've had a wonderful time. But they can, they're quite full on. So it's back to back. And I kind of thought, oh, do I want to go see this? I'm not sure. And just before I was going in with my friend, I heard somebody ask an usher how long it was going to be. And the answer was 3 hours and 20 minutes. And I thought, oh, escape. But anyway, we sat down and it turned out to be wonderful, and it kind of revived my love of the theatre, which is a lovely feeling. So I had read Three Sisters in college, but I had never seen it. And I had also, when I was kind of in secondary school, I think I had done like a monologue from... I thought her name at the time was Irina, but I learned seeing play that it was Irina. So I was really looking, it was something that I probably connected with just from that kind of acting background as well. But this production was adapted by Ciara Elizabeth Smith, who's an Irish playwright, and it was directed by Mark Burrell. It had a really strong ensemble cast. It's quite a big cast in Three Sisters, and everyone was really good. And, you know, I love the play itself. I'm a huge fan of Chekhov, particularly his short stories, but the kind of themes of stasis and disillusionment and lack of fulfillment came across brilliantly with the three sisters. Megan Cusack was the middle sister, Masha, and she particularly gave a kind of a, you know, every line was almost a pout or an attitude. But I guess the headline draw for many people would have been the fact that Saoirse Monica Jackson, the northern actress who's in Derry Girls, she was playing the role of Natasha. And I had never seen Derry Girls, but I had seen her recently in a BBC series set in Liverpool called This City Is Ours with Sean Bean, and she was brilliant. Her Liverpool accent was just, you know, you'd never think she wasn't from there. So I was looking forward to see what she was going to be like on stage, and she lit up the stage. Like whenever she came out, you know, there was kind of, she just had such presence, and she's quite a small actress physically, but she was able to just take the whole stage. So she had that kind of real star quality, and the role of Natasha is brilliant as well, you know, for somebody with kind of such range. She starts off as being a kind of an outsider character with low self-esteem and a lot of neurosis, and that develops over the course of the play because it's left unchecked, and because her husband kind of leaves her, you know, he kind of feeds it in a way into something really quite nasty by the end of the play. And it's just brilliant. It was brilliantly done in this production.
Sounds brilliant. I remember going to see it as a child, and they all want to go to Moscow. Moscow,
they need to get out.
So modern. As a playwright, because all that endless talking and anxiety, it's just like hearing somebody in the 21st century. So he's not going to die. He is your man when it comes to kind of anxiety and
there was a real, and maybe because of the three sisters were maybe of an age, but you know, there was a real millennial feel to it as well. You know, it did feel really modern and of the time.
And again, it would be nice if that came back again, wouldn't it? So we could all see it.
Yeah, it was quite a short run. It was like October 9th to the 12th. So I think there was only 3 or 4 nights. So it may well come back, I would say.
That would be fantastic. So we're hoping for the Gaz exhibition, and we're hoping for the Three Sisters. That was at the Gaiety, wasn't it?
At the Gaiety.
So thanks for that. So before we go, we're just going to do a quick run around, and nobody has to feel that they have to answer if they want to, but if they don't want to. But we're wondering, you've been talking about everybody else's work. It would just be so nice to hear about you and your work. So maybe, Caitriona, to start off with you are working on a memoir, isn't that right?
I'm in the final proofreading stages, so a couple of days left of it, of a memoir called Home Economics, and it's coming out next April with New Island.
Oh, it's a brilliant title. And is it about, I've heard rumours that it's a little bit about the difficulty of writing a second novel, also being a mother, because you've 2 young children, and working as well.
So the basic, I think, theme was trying to write that difficult second novel, which took 6 or 7 years for me, and just kind of what distracted me, having kids or having a cleaning job, and, you know, taking the cleaning job to help me write then ended up distracting me from the writing. So it's the kind of the muddling through of it all.
The muddling through, we'll go on, as Chekhov was saying as well, we'll go on. But that sounds so interesting. So it's March 2026 with New Island, isn't it?
I think it's April. We haven't set date yet, but next 2026 anyway.
We're all looking forward to it anyway. So thanks for telling us about that.
And Sarah, you've got something coming out as well, haven't you?
Yes, my third novel, Little Vanities, is going to be out next May with Pushkin Press. And it's I'm similar to Caitriona, maybe a little bit behind. I'm still proofing it, and we'll hopefully get to do that again in January and February after Christmas. I'm always very reluctant to give up my drafts, so it's kind of a wrenching process goes on. But it's in brief, it's a story about 2 couples, and it's a story about betrayal. And actually, there's quite a bit of theatre in it. One of the characters is an actor, and there's a production of Harold Pinter's Betrayal, kind of the book, kind of, you know, it's kind of a central aspect of the book as well. So, yeah, still working on it, but almost there.
Can't wait, because I love Harold Pinter. So now we're going to move on to Neil.
A bit like Caitriona, actually. I've been working on a memoir over this last while. The form is, it's a memoir in essays. And some of the essays have seen the light of day in Banshee, in the Dublin Review. I've got a new one coming out in the new year in Paper Visual Art, PVA. And it's interesting that there is so much very good work coming out of the north at the moment, dealing with the events of the last 60 years. I think we're able to talk about it now from a little bit of distance of space and time. And the work that I'm putting together has to do with my family's life in the north, in Derry, in those years, how the Troubles impacted on my family, on me, on my city as well of Derry. So yeah, watch this space.
Oh, that'll be very interesting. So thanks for all these revelations. They're very intriguing.
And Philip?
Well, I'm looking to get more radio drama produced, and there's a novel looking for a publisher, but enough of that.
No, then more of that. Yeah, we want the publisher to reach out and say, yes, we want this. But anyway, yeah, your radio drama is always really interesting, Philip, so it'll be lovely to hear that. So I think we've come to the end. We'd like to thank our writers, Sarah Gilmartin, Neil Hegarty, Caitriona, Lally, and Philip Davison for talking today, not just about their favourite books of 2025, but also the wonderful cultural events that they attended and loved, and also giving us a little sneak preview of what's coming out and what they're up to. This is sadly our very last podcast of 2025. Not our last podcast, I hope, but thanks to all our listeners and writers and poets, publishers and supporters who've kept us going all the way through the 5 years, Peter. Can you believe it? Since we started in COVID, and we can't thank you enough. We want to especially thank the Arts Council for the support of this podcast with a project award, and just wish you all happy Christmas and happy reading. Well done, everyone. And that's much longer than we thought. I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sarah here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Apple, Spotify, Pocket Casts, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfastireland.buzzsprout.com. So
we'll be back again. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.